Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. So great to see so many classrooms joining us from across North America for today's event. In fact, I already see a lot of classrooms who are tuning in live via YouTube, sending in some greetings. So keep those coming. But for now, I'll give a quick shout out to our water rockers, grade 5s in Guelph, Ontario. We've got some 5th graders hanging out with us in Rochester, Minnesota, 4th graders in Niagara. It looks like people in North Carolina and Guelph, Ontario as well. So keep those greetings coming. This month, we have been following a theme of polar regions and polar exploration. We've been talking to scientists and explorers and researchers from around the world who are studying the polar regions. And then, of course, bringing back media and information and research to us. Because what you might not know is our polar regions are warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. So it's important to try and protect the amazing biodiversity we have in those polar regions, that we're aware of what's happening. Now, before I introduce our speakers for today's event, I do want to share the link to our website. We still have several January events coming up you can check out. And then we've just launched our February events. So every February, we kick out all the men and we host women in science and exploration all month long. So do check out some of those events as they'll be loading up over the next couple of days. All right, let's get to today's event. So the Arctic Ocean is a vast, remote, and challenging place. And scientists are trying to figure out how many walrus there are there. And it's not easy to do. Going around in a boat, maybe trying to fly around in a plane, definitely challenging for such a large area. And we're trying to figure out how the climate crisis is affecting their populations. So jointly led by the World Wildlife Fund and the British Antarctic Survey, we have Walrus from Space. It aims to use high-resolution satellite imagery and citizen scientists from around the world over the next 4 years to give scientists a clearer picture of the populations. So joining us today, we have Peter Fretwell. He is a senior scientist at the British Antarctic Survey, and Rod Downie. He is the World Wildlife Fund's chief advisor for polar regions. Let's bring the two of them live into the call with us right now. There we go. Hey, Rod. Hey, Peter. How are we doing today?
Hello.
All right. Well, it's so great to have the two of you joining us live. It's been a while since we connected. We had the two of you join us for a Global Biodiversity Festival last May, which was an absolute blast. And I commented at the time that Walrus from Space would just be the best band name. I think that would be a really cool band name to have. I think our students would probably agree with us today.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And we're happy to be rock stars as well as scientists, I'm sure.
All right. Excellent. Well, I'm going to let the two of you take over for a bit, and then we'll have a little Kahoot quiz and we will do some Q&A action.
Great. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone across the Atlantic Ocean. So as Joe said, my name's Rod Downie. I lead the polar program for WWF based here in the UK. And I'm joined by Peter, who is one of the world's experts in the use of remote sensing to count wildlife around the world. And we're here to share our new and exciting. Let me just share my screen if I can. Hopefully you can see that. So we're here to share our new and very exciting 5-year science project. And as Joe says, it's called Walrus from Space. And we're working with partners right around the Arctic on this project. The overarching aim of our work is to try and better understand walrus populations, how they're impacted by the climate crisis now, but also how they might respond in a climate-altered future. And we're doing that in order to provide evidence to help to secure a future for walrus in the wild in the context of the extreme climate crisis that we're facing. But first of all, before we get to that, and perhaps for those of you who don't know walrus, well, let's introduce you. So they're a key species in the Arctic marine ecosystem. but they're also culturally very important and very significant to Arctic people and to Arctic communities, many of whom live in really close proximity to walrus. They're, of course, very easily recognizable by their sheer size. I mean, some of these big guys can weigh like 1.5 tons. I mean, they're huge, but they're also recognizable by their magnificent tusks. And it's probably these tusks that are their most remarkable features. They're actually enlarged upper canine teeth, but they don't use them for feeding. They actually use them for cutting out and keeping breathing holes open in the ice. They use them for fighting and for displaying during the mating season. And they use them for literally hauling themselves out up onto the ice. And this is where walrus like to be. This is where they're usually observed, is out on these moving ice floes. They rarely venture far from the coast or far from the shallow waters of the continental shelf, because that's where they know they can feed. And they're great divers. They're really good at diving. I mean, some of these guys can dive down to more than 100 meters, but generally they'll do quite short, shallow dives. And they dive to the bottom of the seabed, and that's where they feed on things like mollusks. So things like clams or sea snails or crabs or other invertebrates. And they have a voracious appetite. They've got a huge appetite. I mean, these guys can eat like 1,000 clams for one meal, and they've got a huge appetite. And in fact, some of the really big male walrus also feed on smaller marine mammals like seals. They're only found in the Arctic, although interestingly, we had a couple of vagrants who visited the shores of the UK this year, but generally they're only found around the Arctic. And the map that you see here, so this was one of the first outputs from our project. This is a map that Peter compiled, and this shows the discontinuous circumpolar distribution of walrus. So there are currently 2 recognized subspecies of walrus. Now, so at the top of this map here, that's the Pacific walrus. They're the most numerous of all the walrus. They're found around Alaska and eastern Russia. And they're probably also the most affected by the changes that we're seeing in sea ice in the Arctic. And then down here, so ranging from eastern Canada across to Greenland, Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic, and into Western Russia as well, we've got the Atlantic walrus. And then you've got this third group here called the Laptev walrus. They're only found in the Laptev Sea. Now, science points to the Laptev walrus perhaps being the westernmost extent of the Pacific walrus, but they're certainly a distinct evolutionary group. And so for conservation and for management purposes, we treat them a little bit differently. But the scope of our project is to focus on the Atlantic walrus and the Laptev walrus. And, you know, this is the problem. Arctic nature and Arctic people are facing the reality of the climate crisis. So the region is actually warming about 3 times, nearly 3 times as fast as the global average, certainly more than twice as fast as the global average. And that means that the surface of the sea temperature, that sea temperature is rising, and therefore sea ice is in dramatic decline. And this dramatic loss of sea ice is actually one of the most visible signs of the climate crisis on our planet. It's sea ice is frozen ocean, and it's declining in all seasons. It's particularly declining during the summer months, when we're losing about 13% per decade. That's at the minimum around September time. And models predict that the Arctic could be virtually free of summer sea ice during our lifetimes. And that has really profound implications, both for Arctic people and also for Arctic species. But it also has implications way beyond the Arctic, because this sea ice, it acts like this global thermostat. And the way it does that is that it reflects the sun's energy back out into space. So what we're actually doing is that we're replacing that bright, white, reflective surface of the ocean, of sea ice, with the dark blue of the ocean. And of course, darker colors absorb more heat, And that's further raising the temperature of the ocean and the planet as a whole. So let's come back to our walrus back on the sea ice. Now, we've seen that they're really big, powerful animals, but they're also incredibly vulnerable to the climate crisis, as that sea ice is literally melting out from beneath them, and they're facing the environmental and the human consequences of that climate crisis. And the reason why they're so vulnerable is because they prefer to haul out on sea ice. They use it as a platform which they breed on. They give birth to their cubs on the sea ice, and they nurture their young on the sea ice. They use it as a platform to rest between feeding trips. But what we're noticing is that in the Arctic, as that sea ice is diminishing, they're increasingly hauling out in more places, more frequently, and in larger numbers on land. So they're coming more onto the beaches. Now, walrus are very social animals. They're very used to being in large groups. But the problem is that as these beaches become really overcrowded, well, that can have very fatal consequences, because if the big group of walrus get frightened, whether that's by people or by predators such as polar bears, then they can stampede. And they'll stampede towards the coast, towards the sea. And as they stampede, they risk rushing over and crushing some of the young walrus, and that can be deadly. Also, while they're on land, they may need to swim further to get to their food. And as they swim further, they're having to expend more of their energy, and that can have a negative effect on their reproductive success. And then furthermore, the Arctic Ocean is becoming more acidic as it's absorbing more of the carbon dioxide. And that's really bad news for shell-building animals. So animals like clams or sea snails or mollusks, exactly the sort of food that walrus feed on. And then layered on top of all of these problems, the loss of sea ice is also, what we're seeing is that we're seeing increased development of the Arctic. And walrus can be very easily disturbed by shipping traffic, by airplanes, or by other industrial development as the Arctic becomes more accessible. So that's the challenge that we face. And now it's really clear to me that in order to help to safeguard the future of walrus, we need to know more about them. But that's a really, really difficult thing to do, because of course the Arctic is vast, it's remote, it's a very difficult place for scientists to work, and of course, as we've seen, it can be, you can disturb the walrus if you're out there trying to study them. So that's why we've teamed up with the satellite imagery providers. Their name's Maxar, as well as other partners around the Arctic, and we're asking for the public support. We're asking for more than 500,000 people to help us to search for and count Atlantic and Laptev walrus. And you can do that on the Walrus from Space platform. You don't have to go to the Arctic to do that. You can do that from the comforts of your own home. And I'm going to pass over now to Peter, who's going to tell you exactly how we're hoping to do that.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, so the first part of our project really was to try and locate where walrus haul out in the Arctic. We needed to do this because this was so that we could go and send the satellites to take imagery of them. So we compiled a new database of all these haul out sites around the Arctic using previous reports, scientific papers, and indigenous knowledge to try and compile this. And we put all of this together to get a new database. And then when we've done it, next slide, please, Rob. Yeah, and then when we've done this, we sent the Maxar satellites. Now, these satellites are really high resolution. Each pixel on the ground is about 30 centimeters, so you can easily see the walrus in them. And we asked Maxar, the satellite provider, to take all of images of all of the haul outs in one particular year in their breeding season, which is about between July and October. So the first year we did this was 2020, and we got about 86% coverage. So that's pretty good. But the next year, next slide, please, Rob. We did it again in 2021, and now 2021 we got massive coverage. We had 96.6%, so just over 3% were missing. So almost all of the haul out locations at the right time of year, so that we can start looking and spotting those walrus. So we've got the project now. We've sent the satellites, we've got the imagery, and we move on to the next stage, and that is to actually look at the images themselves. So this is a satellite image, and the sort of thing that we see when we're looking from space at the walrus. Now you've got to remember that this satellite is 670 kilometers up in the atmosphere, looking down at this small island. You can see a small island there at the bottom. In the middle there is a small brown blob. If we zoom in, you can actually see the walrus themselves. So I say the resolution is about 30 centimeters per pixel. We can see walrus, we can see individual walrus. We can actually count them by looking at them from space. And this is the job that we have now, that every walrus haul out every year for the next 5 years to try and count every walrus, or at least Laptev and Atlantic walrus on the planet using these satellite images. And we're not doing it by AI, we're not doing it ourselves. We're going to ask the public to do it. So next slide. So we've with the help of Maxar and with a company called GeoHive, who run the platform, WWF and ourselves, we've developed this application, this Walrus from Space app, which is online and live at the moment, where people can go in, log in, sign on. It takes you through a small bit of training, and then you get to start looking and counting walrus. Next slide, please. So the first step we do is to try and find the images where the walrus are. So we've taken all those satellite images and we've chipped them up into areas at 200 meters by 200 meters. That's given us about 600,000 different chips of this, and that's too many for one person or even a team of people to count. So we're hoping for about 500,000 or so people to count it over the next few years, to try and help us to find the walrus and then to eventually count the walrus. So you sign on, and this is what you see, and you've got the choice whether to say there are walrus there or there aren't walrus there. Walrus or no walrus. It's quite binary in the first stage. There's another option as well to say that it's a bad image or a cloudy image. So we're through this stage now for the first year. We've already done this. We've had massive uptake from people. We did it within a few months, and all of those 6,000 tiles have been counted 11 times by the public. So we've had huge interest in this, and we're moving now on to the second stage, which is to count the walrus. So next, and we've got this. To do this, we do two different options. You can either dot the walrus, and this will be coming in the next few months. We're going to be dotting the walrus, so each dot gives us different walrus individual counts. You can see there, top one we've got 37 walrus, the bottom one we've got 67. But often the walrus congregate. They like to cram up, they like to huddle together, keep warm, keep away from predators. So they're too close together. Next slide, please, Rob. So in this case, you can see here on the left-hand side, far too close to count individually. So here we're asking the public to draw lines around the walrus. By getting many people to do this, we can get an average which is usually quite accurate. So we'll do that for all of our images where we have walrus, and that'll give us an estimate of either the number of walrus or the area, and we can work out the areas there, and that will give us a population estimate for each particular image. Unfortunately, however, that doesn't give us a full count, because the images change, the number of walrus change on the beach and is quite variable over the season. Next slide, please, Rob. So over the course of the season, it can vary. We need to make sure that our images are at the right time, or if they're not at the right time, then we can try and compensate for that. And we can do that by looking at coarser satellite imagery. Here you can see a small brown dot on this small peninsula that's moving around. There's a small brown dot. Now this is much coarser imagery, but luckily this is imagery that's free, and it comes maybe once a week or something. So we can check this small brown dot, which is actually the whole of the walrus haul out, and we can see and try and compensate for if our counts might be too big or too small, and what time of year and what part of the season we're in. Next image, please, Rob. Then finally, for the final part of the image, we need to try and associate and work out how the population of walrus is changing. A 5-year count, as long as it is, isn't really enough to give us a full trend in the population. We need a much longer count for that. But what it will do is it will tell us how ice conditions and environmental conditions affect walrus numbers. If we have years where there are less ice, then we might see less walrus or more walrus. We'll be able to work that out and build models and work out what's happening to walrus in the future. This is a map of the ice around the Arctic. The purple areas, the deeper ice, the thicker ice. The green areas are lesser ice. You can see Greenland there at the bottom. We can get this for every colony and every haul out every day over the Arctic summer. So we can work out what the association is with not just ice, but also sea surface temperature and productivity and all of these environmental variables, and try to model then what will happen to walrus in the future and how walrus numbers might be affected over the coming years by the climate crisis. Go on, Rod. And then by using these models, plugging them into ice estimates, and this is the estimate of what ice might have, what ice loss might look like in the next few years, we can start to understand how walrus are going to decrease or how they're going to cope over the next few years. So I'm just going to leave it there. If you've got that, I think we've got one more slide, Rod, and say thank you very much. And we're happy to take questions. I'll go back to you, Joe.
All right, excellent. Well, I'll come back in now. Rod and Peter, thank you so much for giving us a little background information about the walrus and then taking us into the project. It is an ambitious project. It's a big count, but it sounds like you've had tons and tons of people already joining in and counting walrus from space.
Yes, we've had several tens of thousands of people. I haven't looked at the last figures, Joe, but we've had several tens of thousands. So even since we last spoke at the Biodiversity Festival, we've completed the first year's stage 1, which is finding out where the walrus were.
Yep.
And we're now moving on to first of all looking at the 2021 images, and then we'll start to count them in the next stage after that.
All right, awesome. Well, I think it's time that we meet some of our classrooms and we give them a chance to ask some questions. Actually, before that, I've got the Kahoot ready. I almost forgot. Let me share my banner here. If you head to this website, kahoot.it, it is going to ask you for a PIN number. I'm going to share my screen in just a moment and we'll get that PIN number up and you can join in the live Kahoot quiz and we'll see how sharp and how fast everybody is. So let me share my screen here and let's get this Kahoot happening. All right. So just a reminder, if you're lucky enough in your classroom to have one-to-one technology, you can join in live at your seat. Otherwise, maybe your teacher can pop this up on the board for you, and then you can shout out your answers. So let's share that screen. There we go. So here's our code for today. When it asks you for your PIN number, we need 715-7198, and that will bring you into your spot. We'll give things a few moments here to let some students start to join us. There will be 4 questions. They are multiple choice questions. There might be a true or false question mixed in there as well. You have 20 seconds to answer. If you get it right, you get some points. If you get it right really fast, you get even more points. If you get it wrong really fast, you don't get any points. So let's get it right and let's do it quickly. We got lots of students joining already. Looks like we'll be pushing over 100 in the next few moments. We'll see. And then we'll take things live and see who comes out on top on our leaderboard. Let's give it another couple more seconds, see if we push 100. All right, there we go. Okay, I'm going to take us live. We'll have a few more students joining in the background. But for now, let's see how we do. So first question coming up. And that question is, what are scientists hoping to learn about walrus? Was it their population size, the impact of climate change, what walrus might do in the future, or is it all of the above? What are the scientists hoping to learn through this project and through getting that count? All right, good stuff. Most of our crew went with all of the above. And those are three things that I know Rod and Peter are hoping to learn from that info. Let's take a look. Looks like Ishan is in the lead, but the leaderboard's tight. Let's see what happens after question 2. Which activity below do walrus not use their tusks for? Was it fighting, keeping holes open in the ice, catching food, or hauling out onto the ice? Which activity do they not use their tusks for? So if you remember, Rod talked about 3 things that they use them for: their teeth, their canines. Oh, a little bit of a spread, but the correct answer, was catching food. Okay, let's see if our leaderboard shifted. No, we have Ishan still holding down the lead and some shifting down below. Let's jump to our third question. It's a true or false. Walrus can dive up to 100 meters. Was that true or false? Lots of answers coming in nice and quick. Got a couple more seconds. All right, that was true. Good job. Most of our crew is on top of that. A little bit of shifting in the leaderboard. Let's see what happens after our final question. Anything can happen. How does the ocean becoming more acidic affect walrus? Is it they can't stay in the water as long? Does it break down the shells of the shellfish they eat? Does it melt the sea ice faster, or does it have no impact at all? What was mentioned when we talked about things getting a little more acidic in the ocean? All right. Got a bit of a trick question with that one. It was mentioned really quickly. But yeah, it has an impact on the food the walrus eat. It makes it more difficult for them to produce their shells and causes some damage as well. Let's see what happened to our leaderboard. Did that get anybody? Lex came down in 3rd place, holding down that 2nd place. Ashwari, and holding down top spot. Could not fool Ishan. Held it from tape to tape, wire to wire. Good stuff. All right, let's come back from that screen share. Thanks, everybody, for playing a little Kahoot with us today. And let us get into our Q&A action. So if you're tuning in live via YouTube, use that chat. Send us in some questions. In fact, we've already got some questions here via the chat. So let's work one of those in right away to start. So in Mr. Strange's class, they are wondering, are the walrus, this is Jackson. Jackson's wondering, are the walrus born with those tusks?
I'll take that one. No, they grow them. So they'll be there very small, but they kind of grow them as they get older.
All right, excellent. I noticed in one of the pictures that you shared that some of them had the smaller ones, some of them had nice big ones, and some had just one. So what might have happened in a case like that for them to just have one?
Yeah, they probably lost it in a fight. Probably fighting is the most normal way that a walrus would lose a tusk. But it certainly puts it at a disadvantage. You know, they use them to haul out onto the ice. So they literally pull their whole body weight out. So they've only got one. It becomes more challenging for them, certainly.
Yeah, I can see that when you weigh up to 1.5 tons. If you've only got one tusk, that would make things a little bit difficult for sure. All right, let's meet some of our camera classrooms and let's work in their questions. So we're going to start off and take a little trip to Chalk River in Ontario. We've got some grade 6, 7, and 8s joining us. Let's bring them into the call here. There they are. How are we doing, Chalk River?
What is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a walrus?
What? So the question was, what is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a walrus? Well, there's a few things that can be really dangerous that can happen to a walrus. One, of course, would be if they get attacked by polar bears. So polar bears are predators. Now, they won't go for the big tuskers, but they will go for smaller walrus. And that's one of the reasons why walrus congregate together. It's a defense mechanism against predators like polar bears. But I'd say maybe the most dangerous thing for walrus would be disturbance by human beings. You know, if you get people making a lot of noise and, you know, flying aircraft very low over them, that could really scare them. And they go into a big stampede. And then lots of walrus can get crushed. So I'd say that's probably the most dangerous. But actually, thinking about it longer term, the most dangerous thing for walrus, of course, is climate change.
All right. It is not an easy time to be a walrus right now. That's for sure. Okay, let's jump to another classroom here and steal a question. So we're going to go to Miss Johnson's crew. Looks like they're hanging out with us in Connecticut, some 6th graders. Let's see if we can get them live into the call here. Oh, no, I lied. They disappeared. So maybe they had a tech issue. Hopefully they'll pop back in with us shortly and we can get some of their questions. So we're going to take a long distance trip to Mumbai. We've got some 4th and 5th graders hanging out with us. It's late in the evening for them. So they stay up a little bit late to hang out in these events, which is really cool. We've got their principal joining us to represent them on screen. How are we doing today?
Yeah, hi, Rod and Peter, and it was wonderful to, see your presentation. I have with me my 5th and 6th graders, and yes, it's 10 p.m. At night, and some of them have stayed past their bedtime, but they didn't want to miss this event. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if I can share my screen. Would I be able to share screen?
Yeah, why don't you give it a try, see if it works for us. Let me know if you have any questions.
Okay.
I see it coming up now.
Yes.
There, we see some of them there. Hey, everyone. Thanks for staying up late to hang out with us.
All right. So I have a question. One of them wants to know, why do they fight? What's the most common reason for walruses to fight?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks, guys. I got a bit of an echo there. Thanks for listening to us. One of the main reasons why they would be fighting is during the mating season, and you get the really big males that are competing for the females. So that's generally when they will fight, will be during the breeding season.
All right. Since we have our crew front and center with the screen share, let's grab another question.
Thank you.
Do you have another question for us from the crew?
Is that question for me, Joe?
Yeah. I thought, well, we had them on screen that we grab another question. Yeah.
Yes. I have one more question.
Sure.
So this is something which I wanted to know. You mentioned all the people who helped you in the counting. Do they need to have some kind of training, or are they scientists, or are they biodiversity experts, or is it for example, can my students get on board too?
Yes. Everybody can do this. We're asking for people over over the age of 11. I think anybody under probably needs to be supervised by an adult, but over 11 or 12, we're saying anybody can do it. So it's open to the whole public. I'll bring up the website in a moment and give you the website address. You just log in, and then when you do that, you have to go through a training routine to start with, where we show you what a walrus looks like, some of the things that might throw you off guard, like, for instance, rusted barrels or vegetation, which can sometimes confuse you a little bit. So you go through a training routine, try out a few things, and then when you've got to the stage where you're answering the right questions, then you go on and go on the actual app itself and start doing this for live and helping out scientists. So the Citizen Science Project is helping us really understand a great deal about Walrus, and it's all down to members of the public.
All right, and I've got a link here, Peter. Does this look like the right link?
Just a moment. Yep, that's the one.
Perfect. So if you do want to check out the site, if you do want to get involved, do a little bit of training, and then, yeah, start contributing to science. And I think I love that so much, that science is being opened up to anybody. There's so many great citizen science projects, and this is a great one and a great opportunity for people to contribute to, what's happening with our changing planet. So I'll keep that up there. We'll put it up again closer to the end. Let's grab a question here from our YouTube crew. So let's see. We have Mr. Morrell's crew. They're joining us in Salem, Massachusetts. And then they're wondering about the size of the colonies. Are you finding, is there kind of an average size? Does it vary a lot? What do the size of those groups look like?
It varies quite a lot. You can get ones where you can see 2 or 3, just two or three walrus. We can actually see them because we can see them individually, or you can get many hundreds. In some cases, for the Pacific walrus, there are many thousands hauled out together, and that's one of the reasons why we're not really focusing on the Pacific walrus. There are just too many in those particular haul outs. For the smaller groups, it's much more possible to count. We can count them individually. They're probably less than 100. Once they go over 100, they tend to congregate too much together, and we're looking at areas rather than actual individuals. But sometimes for the Atlantic and the Laptev, they can still be, certainly for the Laptev, several thousand strong. The Atlantic ones tend to be just a few or a few hundred.
Okay, and grabbing one more question from YouTube before we go to another one of our classrooms. This question here is from Cassidy. She's in Miss G's 5th grade class. And so did I pick the right one there? No, this one's from Kaylin. Kaylin is in Miss G's 5th class and wants to know, have you ever touched a walrus? So I know you wouldn't go out and try to pet or touch a walrus, but have you ever done work maybe tagging walrus or anything like that where you had to interact with them?
I'll kick that off, Peter, and then you can come in maybe. So the quick answer is no. So I've seen walrus, but seen walrus from a distance. That was when I was doing polar bear research, actually, up in the Canadian Arctic. So I've only seen them from a distance, but we are hoping to be heading out to do some field work shortly. So Peter, maybe you want to just touch on that, perhaps?
Yes. To try and understand how accurate our counts are, we're going to be doing survey work over walrus to ground truth the actual the accuracy of the satellite counts. So we're heading out to Svalbard, we hope, this year, and maybe some of the other Arctic places in the other years of the project, because we really need to work that out. Myself, I work for British Antarctic Survey, so I've been to the Antarctic many times, but this was my first research trip to the Arctic, although we have been looking at walrus now on satellite. It'll be really good to get out and actually see them in the flesh. Although we won't be touching them. We'll probably be surveying them by a UAV, a drone.
All right, awesome. We're going to go to Sudbury. We've got some 4th, 5th graders hanging out with Mr. Dunn. Let's bring them in, and we'll grab 2 questions from them if they have them handy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Peter, Rod. Great presentation. Damon has a question.
If all of the Arctic ice melts, can walruses survive as a species?
I think you're muted, Rod.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I was still on mute. I was just saying that's such a great question, and it's really the reason why we're doing this project, is to try and project in the future what might happen if all the ice goes, because it's unprecedented. We've never been in that situation before where walrus have faced a future with less ice, or potentially no ice for certain months of the year. But the truth is we don't know, but we know that they have evolved as a species to live on and around and dive underneath the sea ice. So we know it's not a good thing, but we don't know if they could survive. It certainly would have an effect on the population.
And Mei Lin has a great question.
What would happen to the ecosystem if the walruses went extinct?
Yeah, another great question. So we know that walrus play some really important functions within the Arctic ecosystem. They're both predators and prey. So they are fed upon, for example, by polar bears. And we know that polar bears are facing just as challenging a future as the walrus are. But equally, we know that they feed on many of the creatures that live on the bottom of the seabed, what we call benthic species. So we know that they play a really important role in the ecosystem. And when you remove any sort of key species from an ecosystem, that's going to change the balance in other parts of it. And we know that for certain. But again, this is unprecedented. We've never been in a situation where, we didn't have walrus in the Arctic, certainly not in over timescales that we can look back on. So the truth is that we don't know, but we know that it's not a very healthy thing to happen for the ecosystems as a whole.
All right, let's bring in Mr. Shattuck's crew. I see someone waiting patiently.
Quick question: if walruses fought each other, would they end up one of them killing one or not?
Yeah, I think the question was about the fighting habits and could they kill them. So generally, they wouldn't be trying to kill. I mean, generally it wouldn't result in a fatality, but it could. They're big animals. Most of the fatalities are likely to happen to the very young walrus, to the small walrus. And they literally, if you imagine having something the size of a walrus, so 1.5 tons, land on you, that can crush you. And it's the same with the small walrus. So normally, if there's 2 male walruses fighting, one of them will retreat when he's beaten. But the fatalities will happen to the young if they get crushed.
All right, I'm going to go back to YouTube for a minute here. We've got Mrs. Dennison's 5th graders in Holliston, Massachusetts joining us. And Alyssa wants to know, all good scientists, when they go out on a new project, they make some hypothesis, what they think they're going to see, an educated guess. So even though you're collecting data, what is your hypothesis? What is your thought for what you might see over 5 years?
I'll say that one. Yeah, I would say I think what we're looking to see is that the amount of ice that's there will affect walrus numbers. We don't think that over 5 years we're going to be able to see that trend in walrus numbers, because it depends very much. There's a lot of variability in the natural system. We get warm years, we got cold years. Obviously, we get more warm years than we get cold years now. And if we do see shifts in the ice, as we have seen recently, then we expect that we'll start seeing less walrus generally. However, what we may find is that the walrus come out more onto the beaches. So it's really quite tricky for us to actually understand those numbers at the moment, because not only does the ice affect walrus numbers sort of in the broad scale, in that it's important for walrus survival, but also if we haven't got the ice, then we will see walrus more on the beaches. So we have to understand both the amount of ice in the ecosystem and the walrus before we can start making those models, which will then help us understand what the future of the walrus is. So it's going to be quite hard to say. We are expecting more walrus on the beaches, but also if we see particular shifts in ice, we may see particular decreases in walrus in certain areas. So it'll be really interesting to see. We will get lots and lots of data, and it's about modeling and understanding that data for the broader, longer term future.
All right, we'll grab one more here from YouTube. Miss Fromm's class is joining us. We talked about them diving deep, like 100 meters. How long can a walrus hold its breath for?
Oh. You're on mute again, Rod.
Sorry, I'm not used to this system. My apologies, I was on mute. Yeah, I have seen figures on this. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how long that is, but it's quite phenomenal. I mean, I've seen some are like more than half an hour underwater. I mean, they can dive for long periods, but typically they don't. Typically they'll do kind of short, shallow dives, but they can dive for 30 minutes or more.
All right, let's take a quick visit to a couple more camera classrooms. Sudbury, our 4th and 5th graders, do you have one more for us?
Give me a minute on that, Joe.
I can come back.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Shattuck's
How fast can a walrus swim?
Yeah, I think the question was how fast can it swim? I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know the speed that a walrus can go underwater. I mean, they're very, very efficient, very effective swimmers. I mean, and they can cover huge distances. But they tend to be quite lazy, to be honest. You know, they tend, when they're not feeding, they just like to kind of lie out on the sea ice and let the sea ice move, and so they kind of move with the sea ice. But I don't know. I'll see if I can find an answer to how fast they can swim. I've never seen a figure for that.
I did the quick magic Google search to find out, and it definitely seems like for the most part they like to be kind of a little slower, moving maybe 7 kilometers an hour or about 4 miles per hour. But it says they can get bursts up to 35 kilometers, so about 21 miles per hour if they needed to.
Uh-huh.
And I guess they're not really chasing their food too much. They're kind of using those whiskers, going along the bottom, looking for shellfish and things like that.
Yeah, they're not adapted for speed, I don't think is the reasonable way of looking at it. You know, they've adapted for a different strategy, so they're probably not one of the fastest swimmers in the ocean.
Okay. Let's check in one more time with our crew in Mumbai and see if they have one more question for us.
Yes, in fact, I do. One of my
Awesome.
students wanted to know, do walruses eat their young? I mean, are they cannibalistic?
No, I've never come across any records of walrus feeding on their young. As I think I said in my introduction, I mean, some of the larger males will feed on small seals, but I've certainly never seen any records of walrus being cannibalistic. No, unlike other animals in the Arctic, like polar bears, which will do.
Yeah, and so if a walrus takes over, you know, a group, are the young in any danger?
No, typically not. Only through accidental crushing.
Okay.
So they wouldn't be attacked. No.
All right, and let's visit Sudbury one more time.
Hey, Joe. So obviously this is a huge undertaking and it's a lot of expense. Where do you guys get funding and what is a budget like for your program? Like just using like satellites and stuff like that. I mean, the scope of that is just amazing and astronomical, I'm assume.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So probably less than you expect. I mean, so in terms of the source of our funding, I mean, that comes from our very generous supporters, and also we have some corporate support as well, and we have a lottery fund, a People's Postcode Lottery in the UK, and they fund some of the work. But actually with the satellite imagery, which is the most expensive part of it, but it's not that much because we don't purchase the whilst we task the satellite company to get the images for us. We don't actually purchase those images or the majority of those images from us. So they load them onto their own citizen science platform. So the overall budget over the course of 5 years is just over £1 million. So it's quite a lot. But you know, maybe you'd expect more for a 5-year science project, which involves field work and satellite imagery. So hopefully good value for money.
And adding to that, we don't get imagery of the whole Arctic. We concentrate just on the areas around where the haulouts are. And although those do move, we can narrow it down by previous knowledge where we think those haulouts are, because they're quite reliable where they go.
All right, good stuff. I'm going to squeeze in one last question because I see someone waiting patiently at Mr. Shattuck's crew. So let's get that final question before we wrap for today.
How many walruses have you counted so far?
Well, we're only just at the first stage, which is the finding out where the walrus haul outs are. So we haven't started the counting yet, which hopefully we'll have done by the middle of this year for the first year. So we can't say exactly how many we've counted so far. Well, we haven't counted any so far. And we don't know how many we've got in the first year. But we do know that there are about 200 to 300 of those tiles with haul outs on them that we found in the first year. So we know that there are 200 to 300 haul outs that we found, and we'll be counting those over the course of the next few months.
All right. And I can imagine that the two of you are probably getting really good at looking at that imagery and determining what's a walrus or a barrel or something like that at this stage.
I hope so. We've seen lots and lots of images.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, listen, I want to start off with a huge shout out to our classrooms who joined us on YouTube, our classrooms who sent in those great questions, played Kahoot with us, our camera groups in Canada and the US, and joining us all the way in India as well. Thank you so much for being with us today. In fact, let's see, we've got a couple here who are close by. Let's give them a chance to give a big wave out there. Let's give a big wave to India as well. A shout out to our couple classrooms who had to duck out a little bit early as well. It was great to have you with us. And Rod and Peter, this is such a great project. I'm going to share the link one more time here. Where did I put it? There it is. And yeah, any of our students, I know we had some classrooms, grade 5, grade 6 and higher. So they could definitely get trained up and take part in the counting, take part in a little citizen science action. So thanks so much for sharing this project with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
There's our crew in India. There they are. There they are.
So please log on and become walrus detectives.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to have to do this again later as we get a little further in the project and see how things are going.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We'll have a great rest of the week, everybody. And we hope to see you in more events as January and February carry on. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.